Hey, and welcome to The Office Field Guide. My name's Chris, and I'm reviewing every episode of The Office ever. Today, we are looking at Phyllis's wedding, which is one of the highlights of season 3 for me, not to gush too early. So this one was written by Caroline Williams, which is a new name for me, so what does IMDb say? And it seems she's a writer-producer that's had her hand in all sorts of things. During season 3 of The Office, she was a staff writer, and this is the only episode that she got actual lead credits for. It also said that she's married to someone named Drew Goddard, who I had to look up also, and he's also a writer-producer, but he's worked on some of my favorite series over the last couple of years, including The Good Place and the Daredevil series on Netflix, which is awesome. And this episode was directed by Ken Wittingham, who we know as a veteran director of The Office. He did all of these episodes. Wittingham did get an award from the NAACP for his work on this episode, as well as got a nomination from the Writers Guild of America. Your trivia for this episode is, what is the name of Bob Vance's company? Okay, I'm just kidding, that is way too easy. The real trivia question is, what is Pam and Roy's song? It is shown in this episode, so name it in the comments to get your name in next week's video. Last week's winner was Lazy Turtle, and Lazy Turtle also, once again, found the hidden prison mic or floating Andy. It was here. So for the love of Pete, get here early each week and dethrone Lazy Turtle. Although he cracks me, she, I don't know, cracks me up every comment that they leave. So with that, let's commence this one.
No one asked you anything ever?
All right, so let's kick it off with some cross-marketing. I've always loved this bit.
I hate you!
Long story short, Jeff's dog ended up as ring bearer.
I was able to interview Jake Callender last year, and he's a pretty cool guy. He's actually a pretty talented musician and did the theme song music that plays at the end of every episode. I'll add a link in the description for that interview. And I've been pretty excited about this review for a while because while I was interviewing Robert Schaefer last year, we hit on some great topics. But when talking about the best episode of The Office, he said that Phyllis's wedding was his favorite episode, whether he was in it or not. And later in that interview, I actually got this story out of him, which from what I know, hasn't really been talked about anywhere. So this is a Wolverine exclusive.
I take the microphone from him, and then there was these big, heavy curtains, red curtains, and 3 steps down. So we go through those curtains, but Steve falls down the stairs. He twists his ankle and he's hurt. He's screaming. I mean, it was a brutal moment. I'm like, oh my God, I've just heard the star of the show. But anyway, he's laying there screaming, and I open the curtains back up and I go, help! Because there's 200 people sitting out there, right?
And I love that story because I had it on my list of questions to ask Robert Schaefer what it was like to handle Steve Carell like that. And then this story came out. And I think you can read it on my face as he's telling me the story, that I'm running in my head, what does Steve Carell do for the rest of this episode? Seeing that his ankle was hurt, it's probably why he's either just standing, sitting, or he's walking doing this.
I can't believe I pushed that guy's lazy ass around all day.
I also asked Schaefer how he kept a straight face when acting against Steve Carell. And I asked this because I read this as Schaefer having a hard time trying to keep a straight face, which is when he told me this.
The trick there was not to anticipate when he says it, right? You got to get up organically there. You can't be waiting and get up. So that was really what I was trying to do, was just make sure that I was really listening to what he was saying so that I wasn't getting myself ready.
And I guess it's possible that's just an annoyed face. Either way, this is a reversion back to the socially inept Michael Scott. He's so tone deaf in his desire to be the center of attention that it makes this episode difficult for some to digest.
I do.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you, for the first time as a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Bob Vance!
By the way, have you ever noticed the wedding cake had a fridge on it? Also, did you ever notice that Michael's speech was written on a bunch of napkins? But I think the important stuff from this episode is that this one does a great job of propelling the Jim, Pam, Karen plotline. While watching this for the first time, I found myself just wanting to scream at the TV to tell Jim to just get it together, but I also know how TV producers do. When you have a love interest in a series and you present it in a will they won't they manner, it becomes an integral part of the dramatic tension of the series itself. Think about Ross and Rachel, for example. While the entire series of Friends isn't about Ross and Rachel, it's in the backdrop of almost every episode. Writers have this extremely difficult and maybe even impossible job of progressing the story while keeping it interesting. But everyone knows that once your Jack and Jill come together, it can be the point in which you break the tension of the entire series. So I can empathize so much with the writers of The Office. Put Jim and Pam together too soon, you might lose interest. Do too much stupid stuff with them, you'll overly frustrate your audience. What I can praise for sure in this episode is that it advances the plot lines, but in a very realistic way. Okay, and that got real deep, so let's just do some callbacks from this episode, of which there are a lot. Okay, Stanley's reaction here.
So what's in the box?
A toaster. You?
Toaster?
Unbelievable.
Is probably related to the next clip from Gay Witch Hunt.
I got them a toaster. I tried to return the toaster to the store and they said they no longer sold that kind of toaster. So now my house has got 2 toasters.
And I love this.
The Schrutes have their own traditions. We usually marry standing in our own graves. It makes the funerals very romantic, but the weddings are a bleak affair.
The lovers are standing in their own graves as a reminder that this is the only escape from what they are about to do.
And lastly, Dwight is sporting his spiffy casino night tuxedo.
To my grandfather. He was buried in it, so family heirloom.
Hello, Angela.
Hi, Dwight.
You look as beautiful as the Queen of England.
Thank you.
And there's more I want to call out in this episode, but I think I'll get to it in the deeper meaning, the ratings, and the dendies. So with that, let's just dive into the deeper meaning.
Why don't you explain this to me like I'm 5?
Okay, so I'm gonna suggest that the deeper meaning of this episode is that there is really someone out there for everyone. Now, this is a nuanced statement, I get that. Not everybody wants to be with somebody. So bear with me for a second. I don't prescribe to the idea of a soulmate. It just doesn't render for me. The idea that there's just one person on this planet you are intended to be with for the rest of your life, and if you miss that person, you're missing out on your one chance of happiness. I don't really like that, but further, I don't really think that's how relationships work. And don't get me wrong, I'm not oblivious to romantic inclinations. And look, I'm kind of a weirdo. I started dating my wife when I was 18 years old. 2 kids and almost 15 years later, we're happier now than ever before. But relationships are difficult no matter who you are. I think the idea presented in Phyllis's wedding is that there is a ton of choices on who you marry. Pam's weighing between pining for Jim or settling back with Roy. Pam is socially forced to attend her own wedding to get the idea of what would have been. And yet, towards the end of this episode, she still goes back to Roy. Meanwhile, Jim's weighing the choice between Pam and settling for Karen. I love the writing on this as it's on the heels of this exchange.
I'm pacing myself.
Come on. Get out there. Give the people what they want.
Oh, I'm such a dorky dancer.
I know. And it's very cute.
Pam's portrayed as meek and shies away from the spotlight, and it just drives Jim up a wall, like Pepe Le Pew. Do the kids know who Pepe Le Pew is? It's this guy.
Hello, Pepe.
Whatever, the point is, right after this exchange, Jim's seen looking on Karen taking center stage and singing up a storm. It's adorable, but it's just clearly not Jim's thing. But upon seeing Pam with Roy, he's immediately reminded of the way that she chose Roy over him, and it leads him to this bravado.
Here's a non-hypothetical. I'm really happy I'm with Karen.
But from Phyllis and Bob, you can see that 2 people, no matter their age, their background, their hobbies, their whatever, can find love. And listening to Robert Schaefer talk about their love in a way that blurred the lines between where Bob Vance / Schaefer and Phyllis Smith / Lappin, to the point that I was intrigued about any off-camera romance, was very interesting. He had no comment on the topic, but he did give me this juicy story.
Well, look, here's something that not a lot of people know, but my mother's name is Phyllis Smith. And my dad's name is Bob. So it was Bob and Phyllis. That's my mom and dad. And there I was getting married to Phyllis. And when I got married, I had a photo of them on their wedding day in my pocket.
Valentine's Day gifts. You weren't in that episode, but Phyllis was getting gifts all.
Yes, but there's an even better real life story. I saw that episode, and the very next morning, Phyllis got a dozen long-stemmed red roses delivered to the makeup trailer on the lot. The card was not signed. It just said a quote from E.E. Cummings: "Though love be a day and life be nothing, it shall not stop kissing." So, cut to me arriving a few weeks later. I entered the trailer. You know, Phil's got these roses, but we don't know who sent them. Do you know who sent them? And I said, "Though love be a day, life be nothing, shall not stop kissing."
Regardless, if you've watched The Good Place, it's a great view of what makes someone a soulmate. I'll paraphrase, the actual clip is just too long for me to play. If soulmates are real, they're not found, they're made. You find someone, you get a feeling, then you put the hard work in to build a relationship. It's a reminder that even Michael has someone out there he can click with.
I think it's really cool you hired Kevin.
Thanks.
Or I don't know, maybe this whole episode is just an opportunity for me to plug The Good Place. For real, if you haven't watched The Good Place, it's hilarious, it's deep, and it's extremely touching. But with that, let's dish up some Dundies.
And then I gotta get him to the Dundies.
All right, first and foremost, the Dundie for the most memeable quote in The Office in 2020 goes to Dwight Schrute.
Wow, these people here. There's too many people on this earth. We need a new plague.
It's everywhere right now. It was a great line then, all the more relevant today. Okay, and the second Dundie for the artistic performance of the season goes to Brian Baumgartner. Okay, and don't read into that title too much. I don't really know if it's the entire season. We'll get to that during the wrap-up episode. But Brian Baumgartner gave it all in this episode.
It's a very serious situation.
I talked about this when it came up in season 2, but Baumgartner does not know how to play the drums, nor does he actually sing very well. He actually took some drumming lessons to get ready for this episode, and they had to put a stunt drummer behind the curtain to actually make the music that was happening in the episode. A drumming lead singer was the funniest idea that Baumgartner and Greg Daniels could come up with, and a police cover band doing your wedding, I think that might be the most Scranton thing that something can be. Regardless, for a background bit in this episode, it was great. Dundie well deserved, Brian Baumgartner, and with that, let's rate this thing.
What gives you the right?
Alright, so for the cold opening, I think this one ranks up there with one of the most notable, memorable pranks of all time. I'm struggling with what to actually rate this, but I have to go with my established criteria. This one gets a 4 out of 5 for me. I had to take away points for it not having anything to do with the episode at all. I mean, I couldn't even think of a way to wrap Pavlov's dog into the deeper meaning. So, you know, I had to take some points away. But a 4 out of 5 is probably one of my highest for this season so far, so it's got that. For the episode itself, this is a big one. I'm giving this episode the fabled 5 out of 5. Maybe it's where I am right now in my life, but this episode is just incredible. So well written, so well directed, and since I've gushed mostly on the writing, let me call out one extremely genius example of directing and cinematography. First, they establish that Michael has been kicked out of the wedding, but then we get this sequence of 2 shots back and forth. The first shot is a mid-range shot of Pam staring at something, we don't know. Switch to camera 2 and we see her out of focus in the foreground, and in the background, the focus is set on Jim and Karen dancing. And then it cuts back to Pam after eye contact was made. Pam's been outed and she looks down, and then we cut back to Jim and Karen. Focus is this time directly on Jim, but it slowly fades to Pam. So in these shots, we've got Pam focusing on Jim and then Jim focusing on Pam. And that makes sense technically with the camera focusing, but it also tells us what these characters are focusing on. And then back to the sequence. Once this is too much for Pam to handle, the focus draws back to Jim as he sees the effect everything's having on Pam. The cameraman tracks Jenna Fischer through a whole crowd of people as she exits the hall. This exchange has no words. It's 20 seconds long, but it does feature Brian Baumgartner singing Sting, so that's great. But what even adds to the sequence is directly after Pam exits the room, as though a robot was perfectly controlling this camera. As soon as Fischer exits the shot, the camera jerks over to see Michael repeatedly jumping to get a view of what's going on, and that adds some levity. This is a genius sequence, and every time I watch this, I'm reminded how much talent every single person working on this series had. It definitely earns a 5 out of 5 from me for not just this sequence, but the entire episode could have been a complete flop, but it wasn't. It actually is one of the best episodes of The Office for me. Michael is no picnic in this episode, but he does get a mishappen chance at redemption in the end by finding Uncle Al. But that's just what I think about this episode. What do you think about Phyllis's wedding? Am I inflating this one too much? Is it not all that I'm cracking it up to be? Leave it in the comments. I really want to know your thoughts. Next week, we're going to be looking at the business school episode, which is another great episode of The Office. A few months ago, I got a chance to interview Tom Chick, who plays Gil, Oscar's boyfriend. He's got a great part in the business school episode, so I'll splice some of the footage into that episode as well. As always, like, subscribe, do all that crap. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.